Today's episode is the second of two shows recorded in front of a live audience. That's all of you out there at the beautiful Stony Ford estate home of Susan and Will Brinson in the Hudson Valley, New York. Daniel Kanter is back as my honorary co-host.
I'm honored to be an honorary co-host.
I'm honored to have you here. And we'll talk about our thought processes for choosing an old house. And then later, we're going to have a panel discussion about money, and how we manage rehab, upkeep, and maintenance costs and projects and all that good stuff. But first, I am Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and you're listening to True Tales from Old Houses, episode 87. So hello, welcome back, everyone in the audience. My panel is up here with me. I want to quickly say thank you again to Susan and Will Brinson. You're going to be part of the panel discussion, but I am so grateful that you're here and you have this house open to us, and it's so wonderful. Thank you.
Our pleasure. I'm happy to see it filled with people because I think that that's the way it was designed and always intended.
Yeah, and I have to say you have the most comfortable bed I have slept on in months.
I put a lot of thought into mattresses and sheets and pillows and all that stuff. I absolutely love it.
Talking about finances.
Yeah. I also want to say a quick thanks to my Season 8 supporters, Sutherland Wells, Preservan, and The Window Course. And those sponsors are handpicked to be relevant to all of you in the Old House community. So please do take a look at what they offer and enjoy my coupon codes that are always available in the show notes of the app you use to listen to this podcast, and also always on our website. And I have a few reminders. I did not tell the audience that you have to listen to the same reminders again. Sorry, these shows come out 2 weeks apart, so I should have shared that with you. But the reminders are that I'll be in Boston on Tuesday, December 6th in Boston Common to see the Christmas tree and record a short segment for the podcast. And hopefully some of you can join me for a really informal, maybe a dinner, drink, something like that, old house gathering. We can all nerd out and talk about old houses again, because I just can't get enough. And I know a lot of you feel the exact same way. So send me a message through the website or direct message me on social media and let me know if you'll be there. And I will write more about that gathering in the newsletter, which you can subscribe to at truetalesfromoldhouses.com/newsletter, and also on social media. And I also always have information about next summer's bus tour to Montreal, Quebec City, and the Canadian Maritimes. That's all right on the website and in the show notes. So I hope you can come and join me for that. We're going to have a really good time. And if you're interested in what's going on at Blake Hill House, then you'll always find those updates at blakehillhouse.com. So, listener Q&A, Daniel.
My favorite.
I know, you've all been waiting. It's been so fun to have a co-host again. I didn't realize how much I missed that, but thank you for being here.
Again, I'll do this as much as you want.
All right, today's question comes from Sarah. Are you ready to answer another question?
Yes.
Okay, the question is, I would love to hear through your thought process for choosing an old house to rehab. Are there any red flags to be aware of or hindsight advice? And before you start, I got a couple things, because basically this season's full listener question is basically all about hindsight. So listen to some previous episodes and you'll hear all of those red flags and such that you want to know. But I thought you'd be really good at answering this question because you work with a land bank. So you have more houses than I have, certainly. And I think you're the right person to answer this question. I mean, the land bank has to make difficult decisions.
We have to make tough decisions sometimes. So we actually, we just closed on a grant program with the state, and it was supposed to be for 5 homes. And about halfway through all the ins and outs of securing this grant, we actually had to cut an entire house because structurally it just blew the budgets. And so
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk back just a little bit because
Yeah.
everybody who was here last year already knows what a land bank is. But tell us real quick what the land bank is.
Oh, sure. So a land bank is a nonprofit public authority. They are all over the country. I think there's 27 in New York State. Mine is the Kingston City Land Bank because I live in Kingston. And it's one of the youngest, but we've done a lot of work that I'm very proud of. So we acquire city-owned properties that have been seized through tax foreclosure, which is, a horrible thing for anybody to lose their house. It's often somebody who's passed away and doesn't have family or any number of things. And so we acquire those houses from the city of Kingston. And so far, most of what we've done is fully rehab the homes, all new everything basically except the good stuff, and then sell them as affordable housing. So they're priced kind of based on the income of the buyer that we're, seeking to serve. So the house that we sold a house last week, which was really exciting because you work for years on these things and then finally you get to actually meet somebody who's going to live there. And so we sold that for less than half of market value. So it's really cool work to get to do. But I'm there, every step of the way from pre-acquisition, walking through this house that in general, they've been vacant minimum like 3 years, but usually much longer. So we're doing one right now that's been vacant for 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I get to see the full cycle and be very involved in how they get renovated. And
they're all old. So when you are making decisions about, and I know you work for a team, so I'm going to say you as if you are the only person making decisions, but I know you've made it.
I'm just kidding.
But I know you've made it clear that you are one of a team. But as the representative of that team, tell me how. You always root for the underdog. Anybody who knows Daniel roots for the underdog. So do you have deal breakers?
Do I have deal breakers? Well, with the land bank, we can't really be that picky choosy because there's just not that many houses. Luckily, there's not that many houses that we are dealing with because we have a fairly low volume of foreclosures. I will say, in my experience, brick homes are particularly challenging. If there are structural issues with a brick house, they tend to be much more costly and difficult to repair. So that's one thing. Not necessarily a deal breaker, but in terms of like kind of red flags, major kind of cracks in plaster that on exterior walls where, can indicate a structural issue. The biggest thing I look for, honestly, is things that have been renovated. So I will take a old, messed up, abandoned house any day over a house that's been heavily renovated because those renovations generally are done wrong or wrong enough to cause other problems. And the more screwed up something looks, I find the more able it is to be renovated than when things appear move-in ready or something close to it and might be concealing a lot of issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From my perspective now, I'm thinking more about, my next home because I will be downsizing, which seems weird because I live in a really big house right now, but I will be moving into, as far as I'm concerned, another old house, but in a completely different part of the country. So when I'm looking at the old house compared to the old house that I live in now, I'm kind of thinking about how we want to spend our time, how much of our weekends and evenings and vacations and things that we want to spend on our house. And for everybody, that's different. So there's no one size fits all for that. But I think I really consider that when I'm looking at old houses and the size. Our house is 2-story and the roof line is about 24 feet up. And I can't even get a ladder that high. It takes myself plus 3 of my kids that are teenagers to move the ladder. And then imagine doing the gutters. And then it's like, bloop, I got to move it over 2 feet. It takes 4 of us to move it every time we do. So we're thinking about things like that because although I'm still very physically capable of doing all that work, and I don't mind. I'll dig my hand in a gutter. Doesn't bother me. But I need to be able to get to them. And we have snow removal. There's just a lot of things to think about. And that comes down to, I guess, how capable we are and how we want to spend our time. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think for other deal breakers, which aren't necessarily deal breakers, I think if there are elements of old houses that you really like that are gone, it's hard to replace things. Like, obviously, we have amazing salvage out there, and there's all kinds of things that you can do. But once your original windows are gone, actually finding the right size sash and getting it back in and having the weights work and all of those things, like, is a ton of effort and may not be allowed by your building department if you're permitting the job. So, these are things to think about. And why preservation is important, because once it's gone, it's very hard to put back.
Sure.
Often.
Yeah. And I think you're right about that permitted process too. And that happens a lot in cities. People want to put something back into their house and they're denied.
Yeah.
Because they just are. New windows are better than old windows.
Grandfathering is a beautiful thing because
yes, it is.
Yeah.
As well as living in a town with primarily old house inventory, because most people are keeping a lot of things. They aren't getting rid of them as quickly, but it is tough living in a place. I don't live in that place, but living in a place with maybe just a handful of historic houses, I'm sure that's quite a uphill battle.
Yeah, or, a building department that's under pressure to enforce things. So in my city, we passed New York State stretch energy code, which goes beyond the basic energy code that the country has adopted. So with 4 of our land bank houses, we had to kind of go back to the plans and respec all of this stuff, because even though all the windows we're putting in are brand new and they're only replacing replacement windows, so don't get mad at me. But even though they're brand new, they're high quality, they're great windows, we had to respec everything to meet the energy code.
Extra work for everyone.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But, I think the building department, they're doing their jobs and they want to help us do these jobs and preserve the buildings, but they also have to enforce certain things. And again, if it's already there and you don't have to really mess with it, you're probably good. But if you're doing a major renovation, your hand may be forced into stuff you don't really want to do.
Right. So if we had to sum up our answers, I guess mine would basically be about just know how you want to spend your time. How would you sum up yours?
Oh, everything I just said.
Okay.
I don't know what I said, Stacy.
Okay. All right. Well, for you, I feel like there's always red flags. I guess another thing I would say is that you control seekers, and I know it because no. You got to
Hi, we've met.
Hello, yes. And when you are a control seeker, sometimes you want the answers to all your questions before you get there. And there's a certain amount of knowing as much as you can, doing your due diligence, but also letting go, because you can't control everything. You don't know when the lifespan of something is over, if it's going to be on your watch or somebody else's watch. So
totally. You expect the unexpected with these jobs or houses or whatever we want to call them. And I've fully forgotten the other part of that sentence. So
right. Perfect. It's just right. It's the end of the day. I loved it. Every minute of it.
Thank you, Stacy.
All right. Well, if you have a DIY or old house question for a guest and I to answer on a future episode, please head on over to True Tales from Old Houses and submit it through the contact form. And now it is my turn to ask you a question. Well, Daniel, we're going to read some answers here. But my question for this season has been, regarding old house ownership, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? And most people have sent questions to us through Instagram or through the contact form or whatnot. But since we have a live audience today, we have official, hot off the press answers to our questions.
I love how simple this is from Paula. And regarding your old house, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? It doesn't have insulation. I love that. Don't worry, mine doesn't either. Everything's fine.
By a show of hands, how many people were actually surprised by that? I didn't know my house didn't have insulation. Well, I knew it didn't, but I didn't know that was a big deal. Anybody else? Apparently, it's just us.
Kind of, sort of. Well, I have a really odd situation. Not that odd for this area, but in my house, it's a wood frame house, 2x4 walls, and it has brick and mortar in all of the stud bays, and it's called nogging. And Kingston was a brick town. We produced bricks, And so basically, all of these bricks that are in my walls are called salmon bricks, which for some reason means that they were like too far away from the fire when they were getting fired, or they broke or something. And so they used them to insulate the walls. And it was basically fireproofing and pest proofing was the intention. But unlike your standard like Victorian house where your walls are hollow and they can blow in insulation, there's other ways to get the walls insulated. You can't do that when the walls are already stuffed full of brick and mortar. And the brick and mortar has an R value of less than 1. So it is terrible insulation. And there's kind of nothing to do about it other than either tear it all out, which would involve taking off all your siding or all of your plaster, which I don't want to do. Or you can fur in all your walls, but no one wants to do that either. So,
all right. So the next one comes from Samantha and John. Regarding your old house, what do you wish you knew then? From Samantha and John. How many mice there are? Where there's one, there's more, right? How about the next one?
Can I admit, I've seen one mouse in my house in nearly a decade.
And you do not own a cat.
And there were not more, as far as I know.
Yeah.
There's a whole like community in the basement, probably.
Yeah, I was going to say that's where they live. The traps go in the basement.
Listen, I don't know. It was in my kitchen. It was so cute. Okay. Regarding your old house, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? How long it would be, which I assume is how long the renovation would take. And I'm glad I didn't know that because I wouldn't have done it.
Right. I completely agree. I did an interview with David Giffels, who wrote a book. This was a couple of episodes ago. And he was talking about his dad's quote was, "You're only done with your house when you move or when you die." And I think there's a lot of truth to that, for sure.
That feels true, yes.
Right. And this last answer comes from Eliza. And she says, "I don't know anything yet. I've been living in mine for less than a year, but I'm trying to be patient and live in it so I have time to learn." And I don't think she needs any advice from us.
Eliza, were you paid?
Perspective is everything, and you're on the right track, Eliza. Thank you. If anyone out there has an answer to this season's question and you'd like to leave a voicemail, head on over to truetalesfromoldhouses.com and click on the mic icon on the bottom right-hand corner of the page. Follow the prompts from there. You may use your phone or a computer as long as it has a mic. And you are also welcome to submit your answer on the contact page or send me a message through social media. And once again, this season's question is regarding old house ownership. What do you wish you knew then that you know now? So let me know. It's time to take a pause. True Tales from Old Houses continues only because of the generous support from our sponsors. Once again, we are supported by the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. The Window Course is a step-by-step, do-it-yourself window restoration program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. The Window Course offers all of the start-to-finish video instruction you need right now. And hands down, Scott is one of the best teachers in the business. You're going to learn so much. I know that a lot of us are wrapping up the hardcore window restoration projects of summer, but these colder months are the perfect time to take the Window Course. You have time to truly absorb the content so that you can hit the ground running in the spring. And there are also plenty of smaller window restoration tasks that you can tackle during the fall and winter. The course is self-paced, so you can go fast or slow, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the Training Package, then you'll get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. And even better, the Window Course is offered with a money-back guarantee. And I've got an active coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells, maker of exceptional polymerized tung oil finishes since 1965. All of the Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone. And unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of wood so it flexes and contracts as conditions change. making it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills. I've started adding Sutherland Wells products to my oil primer for added flexibility and penetration, most recently on a window jamb as part of the bathroom remodel. And I am so pleased about how smooth the top coat of paint looks now. Now, specifically for pre-coat, I use Clarabelle's, but I also recently used Millie's as a standalone finish on a mid-century walnut dresser in my office. Coincidentally, Millie is also the name of my sweet dog, but Millie's tongue oil smells much better. It smells like oranges, whereas my Millie smells like dog. Sutherland Wells has an entire product line for whatever you're working on right now. Siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it. To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, WELLES, that's sutherlandwells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TRUETALES. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Preservan, a unique preservation franchise opportunity developed by longtime window restoration pro and friend of the podcast, Ty McBride. The mission of Preservan is to save the future by preserving the past. So what exactly is Preservan? Well, what if you could go to work every day on your own terms while also doing something meaningful within your community? What if you could start a home service business without owning complicated and expensive tools that are difficult to transport to and from job sites? The team at Preservan will train and support you to operate a Preservan business in your community, equipping you with the tools you need to perform sustainable wood rot repairs and build your own team of epoxy techs. You'll receive the playbook for a proven preservation business, exclusive access to Everresin epoxy products, business software, and all of the marketing, advertising, training, and technical support you need. Owning a Preservan franchise offers the perfect opportunity for work-life balance while serving your neighbors and community in a recession-proof industry. You'll get to work your own hours and spend the rest of your time in ways that are important to you. To learn more about becoming part of the Preservan family and their mission, go to Preservan, Preservan. Go to preservanfranchise.com/truetales. So for today's special discussion, I actually have a panel of guests, and we're here to talk about money. And I would like to have you just take a moment to introduce yourselves. And I'm going to start over here.
Hi, I'm Will Brinson from House of Brinson.
And Susan Brinson from House of Brinson.
Reggie Young from Hudson Valley House Parts.
Daniel Kanter from Daniel Kanter.
Brad Huber from Itty Bitty Bungalow.
There's going to be some similarities between all of us, but there's also going to be some differences. I would say that this panel is very economically diverse, but I would not say, of course, obviously, that we are racially or culturally diverse. And that's going to play into the dialogue. And we're all pretty keenly aware, I would say, I'm looking at all of you, we're all pretty keenly aware of that missing piece of this conversation. But my hope is that will at least be a leaping off point for maybe some thoughts of your own, how you want to handle things. You know, these houses are very money hungry. So let's start by talking about your projects and not projects that you're working on. I just mean the type of house. So just tell me how big it is, or if you've got two, or, you know, just generally speaking what you're doing. So go ahead and let me have you start, Brad.
So I have my primary residence, which is an 864-foot bungalow in Rochester, New York. And then I recently have acquired a lake cottage in a former Methodist camp in Silver Lake, New York, which needs extensive renovation, has not been inhabited for at least 5 or 8 years.
Yeah. And Brad was on the first episode of this season. So My Cheap Old Lake House was his episode. And we really got into your lake house, which was a lot of fun. We talked about it. I visited him in person, had a good time. So go ahead, Daniel. And you talked about your duplex. So what other house projects?
Oh boy. So the house that I live in is a 1865 kind of Greek revival Italianate sort of hybrid, which needs a ton of work still. I also am working on a house right down the street that is a real funny one. It started as like an outbuilding, probably 1850s or so, and then was added on to a few times. So I never know how to date it, but it's old. And then right next door to that, I got a duplex that is probably 1860s, but heavily renovated over the years. So very little kind of original remaining. And then I have 5 houses with the land bank under construction. And
those are owned by the land bank. Those aren't owned by you.
Correct, thank God.
Yeah.
And then I work on the lake house at Brad's house sometimes. So
He's a real estate mogul
we have a
now.
lot of houses.
Right. How about you, Reggie?
My partner and I just bought a house in Bucks County. It's a 200-year-old stone house that was badly renovated in probably 1965. But we've just peeled it all back and back to all the original stuff. A lot of it will need to be restored, but some of it, like the entire second floor, is as it was now that we peel it back.
And how about you?
We are here at Stony Ford, and Stony Ford was probably built between 1802, 1804-ish, or around 1840. We haven't been able to track it down. It had a big renovation in 1863 and then again in 1953.
I'm going to ask these questions, and anybody that has something to say, just leap in. What is your philosophy, the renovation and maintenance philosophy as they relate to your budget?
I think we all just want to laugh right now.
We're like, what philosophy now?
So take your budget and set it on fire as well.
Yeah. We have a philosophy. We are cash only. And that means that if we do not have money for something, and this is setting emergencies aside, if we do not have cash for something, then we simply do not do the project, and we save our money until we have enough money to do it, within a margin of error, 20%, and then we move forward. So that does require some planning and some guesswork. It has worked out pretty well for us.
And we learn how to do a lot of things ourselves to save us as much money as possible.
Yeah,
Right.
we really want to stretch that cash. So anything that we can teach ourselves, we save an incredible amount of money rather than hiring it out.
Minus, have you considered all of the options? So, could you do it yourself? Could you hire somebody? Could you wait a little bit longer for the tool that you need? And usually one of the options will float up to the top as being one of the best options. And then when I have to make a choice that I don't feel comfortable with because it's a little bit more money than I want to spend, I feel like I can accept that decision because I know that I have carefully considered every other option, and I know that this is the only one that is left that is feasible.
How about you, Reggie? Do you have a different philosophy?
Well, I guess I'd answer that question coming at it from, I used to sit on, for years, on the Architectural Review Commission in Newburgh. And what I've always tried to tell people who were in front of us is the value in these houses is actually in keeping them authentic and original. And that's a problem for like all the we were just talking about, because then you have to work within your budget and it's a lot more expensive.
Sometimes,
maybe initially, but it's a better investment in the long run. So it's a really tricky balance. It's one that I think everybody struggles with.
Am I the only person on this panel who refinanced to pay for some things? He's
I did.
telling your secrets. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
thanks, Daniel.
Is that a secret?
I know
Wait
that.
till we talk about the spreadsheet.
I picture you as a spreadsheet
I
person,
am.
Brad. Yeah.
I am.
When he says he considers every option, what he means is there is an Excel spreadsheet with every option, and you have to scroll and scroll and scroll to see all the columns, and it's
Oh,
pretty
that's
incredible.
really funny. Yeah.
I'm not at all like that.
Well, we refinanced because we finally got to the point where we were just in too big of a hole. Not a hole financially, just in a hole of where we were unable to beat the breakdown at the same pace as the making it better. So we decided to go ahead and refinance. But we did that, of course, when the interest rates were much better than they are now. And we signed the papers in September of 2021. And my husband got a new job and accepted it in October the next month. And he now lives in Salt Lake City. And I live in Western New York. So timing is everything. Our timing was clearly poor, but that was honestly, we needed some pretty high ticket items done on the house. We'd kind of set a timeline for ourselves. We said, all right, we're going to stay in this house for 10 more years. So it made sense to us to refinance because we were going to be in it for 10 years. Obviously, that's not going to be the case now, but that factored into our decision of why to refinance instead of to stick with cash only. But Brad, you refinance. What played into your, let's assume that someday interest rates go down. What played into your decision?
The interest rates, right? So at the time, the interest rates were really favorable. They were better than the interest rate that I had received on the house initially. So even if I didn't want the cash out, it was still kind of a good decision to refinance. And then I needed the cash in order to purchase a property because at the housing market at that time, it is cash only. If you wanted to buy a house, you really couldn't get it with a mortgage, especially for the cost of the property that I was looking at. So I was heaven set when I got the bungalow. So that house I paid $67,000 for. And with the increase in housing values, then suddenly I had all of this equity plus the equity that I had earned by restoring the house. I didn't have any money, like a ton of money to go out and buy a second property with, but I did have this equity. So I did the cash out refinance in order to purchase the lake house for $49,000. And then I had a little bit left over to try to get me, I'm hoping at least 70% of the way through the rehab on this lake house. And, it's an investment. It's a long-term investment in my future. So, maybe instead of investing in stocks, which I was no good at, or investing in other things, I thought, well, I should invest in something that I know something about. And I got some good fortune on this house. And I can maybe, if I play my cards right, roll this into another good decision.
Yeah, that's a good point. May I mention what you do, or would you tell us? Because
I'm a teacher. I don't have any money.
But you do have a summer's worth of work.
I do. I was rich in time, but not necessarily in funds. I just had to play the cards that I had in order to try to get to another place.
Right. So you're cash only, right, Daniel?
Sorry.
What is this thing you call cash, right?
Pardon me. No. I don't want to be swimming in debt. At the same time, I accept that debt is part of my old house journey. So, sometimes the debt life chooses you. So for instance, and maybe this goes back to an earlier question too, but I didn't know when I bought my house that home inspectors are not wizards. And so I didn't realize I was paying somebody $500 to just sort of look at stuff. And I can look at stuff. What I need to know is is the house falling down? And it wasn't falling down. And then the other thing that I didn't really know was how long a quote is good for. So we had priced out the roof replacement with 3 different contractors before buying the house. But 6 or 9 months later, when it came time to actually do the roof replacement, those prices tripled. And so all of a sudden, I did not have the money to replace my roof. However, I had an insurance company that was going to cancel my coverage if I didn't get this done within X amount of time, and a very leaking roof that was, causing problems in the house. Yeah, so I applied for a consumer credit card at a big box store. Magically, and I don't know how because my credit wasn't great, they just sort of gave me a credit limit that was the exact price of my roof. And I charged the whole thing. I had, a contractor do it. It took me 7 years to pay off, but I did. And my house didn't fall apart. So that was good. But yeah, I think others are saying, knowledge is absolutely valuable here. It's not just powerful, but it will save you so much money. So when you do hire a contractor, be that annoying person that follows them around just so you see what they're doing and learn a thing or two. Research everything. Like Brad is saying, go through all of your options. Sometimes it really does make the most sense to just hire somebody, but most of the time you will save a lot of money and learn a lot by doing it yourself. And that does enable you to be more cash centric because all you're buying is materials.
Well, that's actually a good transition because looking at everybody else on the panel too, when does hiring out make sense to you versus DIY?
I feel like we just had this. We just added electrical to our third floor. This is a really busy time of year for us. When we say we're cash only, also, it's not a lot of cash. We've been in this house for a long time. It's nowhere near done. But for our third floor, it was, is it going to take me 4 weeks, 5 weeks to run all the electrical wires and to cut through the walls and do the stuff? Or do I see, have somebody come by and see what the cost is going to be, and kind of figure out, well, what's my time worth versus this? And you kind of you have to play it by ear. It's a bit of a gamble, but our electrician finished our third floor in 2.5 days. I know it would have been over a month for me to do it.
Sure.
And gross, but I'm okay with gross.
Yeah, safety plays a factor for me too. Like I wouldn't do any roofing on my house because the pitch is too steep and it would take me forever. And I would really rather spend my time differently. How about you, Reggie?
So I know how to do most of this stuff because my parents, I grew up in this business, and our version of a family vacation was to go to Williamsburg and study mortar. So
Aren't you lucky?
I can do almost everything. But it's the time thing. I don't have time. I'm giving it 2 days a week right now, but I have somebody that I really trust who's there actually working. So I can kind of direct it. When you're dealing with, the joke on my project is that everything is salvaged. Like we just had to rebuild the entire kitchen floor. Those beams were all salvaged. And I'm kind of a nut. So overseeing that and working with somebody, it probably drives them out of their minds because everything is old. It's a matter of I guess it's the money, it's what you're willing to pay for. And then it's if you have the time to actually do it. Otherwise it could take years, to do your third floor.
Interesting that we're all talking about time. I know that when I bought my old house, I didn't really value my time. I didn't really factor that in. I think maybe it's because I know my time in my house is actually drawing to a close, but I definitely think about my time a lot more. My time in my house is shorter. My time to spend with my children is shorter. There's just so many things that are meeting me towards an end goal that make me really evaluate how I want to spend my days now and beyond this house, for sure. So let's talk about splurging versus saving. I know this is Susan's topic. Susan likes a good splurge.
I have a problem with wallpaper and textiles.
Wallpaper and textiles.
And auction houses.
Oh,
And auction houses.
Anyone who took the house tour and anybody who's ever been here knows that this is truly lovely. As far as I'm concerned, it's worth every penny that you've spent.
Thank you.
Because I'm good at spending other people's money. But it is absolutely gorgeous. You clearly have an eye, and thank you for sharing this gift with all of us. So textiles and wallpaper.
I'm a very high-low person, meaning that my high is really high and my low is really low. So if you take the time to, in the beginning of a project, make sure that your story is really on point, make sure that your design is on point, and you know what you need, you have your sizes, you have your color palettes, everything's kind of figured out, then you can start dividing up your budget and you can figure out where to splurge and where to save. My big saves are on Facebook Marketplace, auction houses. I get really, really high quality furniture at auction houses because I know what I'm looking for. And same thing with Facebook Marketplace. As far as textiles and wallpaper, I will absolutely pay out the nose for those because I think that they make the room. I think that old houses like this beg for them. And there's definitely some saves in those categories, but it's one of the places where I'm not necessarily looking for a deal. But if I happen to bump into one, then I know when I found something really good.
So what's something that's not fancy that you save on?
Oh, rugs. We find rugs for the house. It's not fixing a house, but Susan finds rugs all the time. If you've ever been to our house or see the hallway, it's very long. And we got a rug in the hallway that stretches the whole length for $100. So by getting that for $100, we're able to put that the money that you need a rug. It's very cold in this house. So we're able to put that money somewhere else into the design or into structure or anywhere else.
I knew what size I needed. It's a very odd shape space. I know that in the antique rug world, there's a style of rug called a gallery rug, which would have been a nice size for that space. And I happened to be at an auction house, a country auction house, around the corner, maybe less than 10 or 15 miles from our house. And I looked down and I'm like, wow, that looks like it's going to fit in our hallway. And of course, I sat through the auction and I got it really inexpensively. And it was just I knew what I was looking for. I knew my color palette and I made a really confident decision. And I also knew what the retail price of that rug was. And the retail price of the rug that I bought for $100 was probably $5,000 or $6,000.
Do you have spreadsheets too?
No. We have this app. It's essentially an online budgeting tool. But one of the nice features is that you can have different budgets. So we're getting ready to start thinking about our kitchen renovation, which is going to have so many moving parts. Budget is a big conversation when you're renovating a kitchen because the price tags are just so incredible on every single part of that what I'll do is I'll assign a total amount of money to our renovation. And then we'll start putting things into categories and you can move things around as the renovation progresses. So if you save in one spot or you have an overage in another, you can still track all of your spending and your budgeting for that particular project.
It's the most adult we've ever been in our lives.
I went to art college, so I don't really do well with this budgeting stuff. But that works.
Brad, what's your splurge? Do you have a splurge?
I don't think so.
I feel like this is a compliment. I think you really are good, excellent at squeezing everything out.
It's terrible. It's a really terrible process. Like right now I'm looking for a vintage refrigerator and a vintage stove. So I've decided what I want. I have an idea of what I want in my mind. I have an idea of what the very most it's $300 that I'm going to pay for a vintage refrigerator. And I'm also very specific about that refrigerator. It has to have a full freezer. It has to be white. It has to have all the drawers. I mean, this is insane. But I will look and look and look and look and look and look. And I think I have identified one in Toronto, Canada. So, so I'm trying to go get it. But my time is worth something. And I have the time. So I'm still investing. I'm splurging with my time, right? I'm still splurging because I have spent a lot of time. I wanted wallpaper. I fell in love with this wallpaper. Relentlessly searched the internet for that wallpaper until I found it what I thought was mispriced and pounced on it and got it because I spent hours on the internet looking for what I wanted.
Brad was very upset last week because the border control agent who he spoke to wasn't sure if it was okay to bring a vintage fridge across the border. So, that's what we're dealing with.
Border Patrol hasn't been doing as much research.
They're just not sure.
Yeah. Weird. I figured that would be in the handbook.
Right?
Yeah. How about you, Reggie? Are there any things you splurge on always?
I don't know. I was just sitting here thinking I can't really get out of the salvage business until I finish my house.
Right.
Because I have the opportunity to get stuff.
Sure.
It's kind of been an addiction. So hardware for me is the bling. I mean, to not have great hardware would just, I realize people can make it through life without great hardware. But that's my thing. That's my thing.
Okay. Yeah, hardware.
Yeah.
Good hardware is sometimes hard to find. And you're right. It can make or break a design
and
for sure.
Period appropriate hardware.
For sure. Yeah.
I constantly watch people buying hardware for their houses. And I can't say to them, don't buy that. It's the wrong thing.
Right.
But they're putting Victorian hardware into an earlier house or vice versa or whatever. So it's a thing. Hardware is a whole thing.
All right. Well, I would like to give the audience a moment to ask a question. Has anybody been thinking of any questions that they have?
Yeah. So my question is, I'm curious if there's anything that was a surprise to you. For us, we're looking into our HVAC system, and we thought it would be a certain amount of price. Our estimates would be a certain price, and they're coming in twice as much. So I'm curious if there's any sort of projects that you were going to work on, and it turned out to be a surprise in a good way, much lower or much higher than you were expecting.
I have one for you. This is Susan. We recently did the electrical on our third floor, and this is a decent sized space, and we have multiple estimates over multiple time periods to do this project. We had estimates coming in at $10,000, $12,000. So we were prepared for this. We're like, oh, if we can get in and out of this for 8, we are going to be super lucky. And it came in at $3,500. So that was a major difference. And this is us actually like going out and getting estimates from different companies. So when this one came in from a highly recommended electrician that we both really like, I would absolutely hire them again. And they did an amazing job. I was just like so happy. We've definitely had the reverse of that too, where we get estimates for things. And then whenever the final bill comes in, it's like, 40% more, which is a bit of a shocker.
Right. And I think that happens in old houses, especially with electricity, because they don't know how much work it's going to take to fish wires up through plaster walls. How about the rest of you? Does anybody else have an answer to that question?
Not a good surprise. My God.
Yeah. Well,
Teach me your ways.
I am just telling good surprises because all of us know that doesn't happen very often. So please do tell.
I don't think I've ever not been shocked. I think, my roof was shocking, and just because I had priced it out previously and it was around 10 and then it turned into 30 when it came time to actually hire it. I remember having a lot of sticker shock over, I had to get some woodwork replicated, and just the cost per linear foot of having custom red cedar moldings made for the exterior cornice was really something.
Right. They have to make a knife and everything for it.
Yeah, that was the most expensive part of it, actually.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
My question is, like, when you're renovating these historic homes, navigating the cost of hiring qualified like tradespeople versus just pricing something out for what is the most cost effective, and how do you navigate that balance? And also, like, how do you find tradespeople that are like you trust and value their expertise? And basically, how do you weigh the expertise versus cost benefit analysis? Lots of words that I don't know if I'm using correctly, but that.
All good. Who wants to
I feel like I can really lean into that one.
Do you? Go for it.
There's no difference. You either pick good work or not good work. Unfortunately, that's why we do so many things ourselves, which I know not everybody can, but you're just going to find that, first of all, you need to find someone that's actually worked on an old house, because it makes a difference. They're just built differently, they act differently, and you have to be sympathetic to how they move. And the people that work on new houses, if it's something simple, maybe. But if it's something that has to really like work within the inner workings of your house, you almost can't. And finding a good person, honestly, we ask everybody we know every single time we go to do a new project to see who worked well with them. That one's always the trickiest part.
I mean, I'll make a comment if I may that sort of goes to the last two questions. So you would kind of have to do deep dive research, understand what you're dealing with, and price it out at least 3 ways. That's and have a clue what you're actually asking people to price, because otherwise it's not apples to apples.
Right.
I feel like for me, it's kind of 2 things. I would say oversight and personality. So for me, like, I will choose a contractor who I want to work with because they're respectful, like they listen to what I want. I will choose that guy or girl any day over the person who comes in, thinks they know exactly what's going to happen, and, no, you can't do it like that. Like that I cannot deal with. So along with that is, I think, very careful oversight of your projects, which entails knowing enough to know when there's another way to do something. So like Reggie said, like if you need pipes run to this bathroom, they are always going to choose the path of least resistance. So it's up to you to basically, and you don't have to know how to roughen your own plumbing. You just have to basically know how stuff works so that you can say, I actually have this stud bay right here, and I think we can run it all through that, and let them tell you why you're wrong. And then maybe don't just accept that as wrong if they don't have a great reason. So don't sort of leave it to chance. I've made that mistake. I've watched other people make that mistake where you think that the person you hired who's qualified and licensed and all of that stuff like is going to make the right call when it's A or B, they will almost always make the wrong
They
call.
always make the wrong
And
call.
I will say, like, also, I think this is especially important for women. I think women and gay men probably have a similar experience with often straight men contractors who, you know, they assume you don't know anything. They assume that you haven't done your research and this guy's going to come in and tell you how it's going to be. Like, don't let it happen because we know our stuff.
I will say that similarly, when I've had contractors out and I've done my research and have decided exactly how I want this to go, and I say, okay, so this is what I'd like you to do. This is the way I want it to do. Here are my concerns. Here is this. I want you to be extra careful of this. Then sometimes I get purposefully overbid. So I'll see the guy later, you know, at Home Depot, and he's like, oh, did you ever get XYZ done? And I say, oh yeah, you know, I wound up doing it myself or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I didn't want to work with you because I could already tell that you were going to be you were going to be difficult to work with because you had your own very specific ideas of the way that I was going to do this job. I mean, that's probably a win at the end of the day.
That
but
is
something
definitely
to
a
consider.
win because definitely a win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how many of you know about my bathroom remodel saga, but it is indeed a saga. And I hired someone mainly based on personality because he'd done some other work for me before, put in the whole, well, we never got to the whole bathroom part, but it was just one fiasco after another. And finally, I ended up letting him go. And I ended up also, and didn't pay him for extra work, but I had to tear the entire bathroom out. So the only thing I ended up salvaging when it was all said and done was the plywood on the walls that he'd put in after gutting out some plaster. Small bathroom, 4 foot by 8 foot, 5 foot by 8 foot, not particularly large, but I did the best that I could because he'd worked for me before. I thought he was a good guy, which I still think he's a fine guy. He's just really bad at bathroom remodels. But then I went a different route and I have somebody and it's like night and day. You know, every time he'd put the bottom row of tile in and then he'd call me to come in and look at it and we'd agree. And then he'd get to a transition point and he'd say, I need you to come in before I do this transition. It's just when this whole bathroom fiasco kept snowballing, I kept having all these direct messages on Instagram that would tell me, they'd say, oh, this is why I do everything myself. This is why I can't trust anyone. And I felt really bad about that because here's the deal. I've also had incredible roofers who did a wonderful job. I also had a kitchen remodel that is top notch. There have been more times in my life where people have done good things and good work. But of course, what are we going to talk about, right? We're going to talk about all the bad things. And I didn't want to get mired in that, but the idea that we can't trust anyone really doesn't serve any of us well because this old house journey is a long one and we're going to have to give up control at some point. So go ahead.
I think that when it comes to hiring people, whether you've owned your home for 5 days or you're on your 50th year, it all boils down to communication and how people speak to each other. And also to when I'm really specific, like you, Brad, I'm really specific whenever people work on things. I want things done a certain way. And I realize that could be a lot. I try to pick like my top 3 concerns or just focus on these main things and it seems more digestible. I also think that you have to supervise and ask questions. I mean, this is your house, this is your project, this is your budget. So ask questions. And if they're a little bit annoying, who cares? Like, you know, in any industry that anyone works in, whether you're working in an office, you're an accountant, you know, you work in the service industry, whatever you work in, people are always going to ask questions and about how something is done that they're paying for. And that is 100% okay to ask questions. So I just encourage anyone going through this, don't ever feel bad for asking questions about a service that you're paying for.
Mm-hmm. And to hint on what you were saying about keeping the faith that there are good people out there, you know, recently I had to have a rudimentary test done on my gas line, a pressure test, and it really doesn't even require any supplies, really. And if I could have done it myself, I would have done it myself, but I required a licensed plumber and I was stuck. I had to hire someone. So I called a big name company just because I wanted it done, and they were going to give me a price over the phone, boom, 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 boom. And it was going to be like $500, and $100 of it was just for them to show up.
Right.
And so I got another name, and I called this local plumber, and I said, how much would it be for a pressure test? And he says, well, I don't know. I'll be fair. I'll come out there. And, I was sick to my side because it couldn't compute I'll be fair in my spreadsheet. I didn't know, like, what is I'll be fair? Is that different to you and me? And he came out and he did the pressure test, and he charged me $150. What led me to that decision was I am never going to call that big name company back to my property ever again. If this gentleman comes out here and he charges me the same $500 that I was going to have to pay the big name company, I'm still further ahead because I think I'm going to develop a relationship with a tradesperson that I will call back to this property and for the same price. If he's cheaper, that's great. And I'm still going to develop a relationship with a tradesperson that I'm going to call back.
Sure, absolutely.
I think that also hits a very good point of when you find a good person, treat them really well. Like, people work hard. They deserve to be recognized and praised and paid, of course, for it. And but I do think, like somebody said earlier, like, you find a contractor who has worked on old houses, is really comfortable with working on old houses. I don't think that's necessarily needed.
I agree.
As long as you know what is going on, so that, like the guy that I've worked with for years, like, he doesn't even really care about old houses. He's not interested, but he's a really good sheetrocker. So he has the skills to tape and mud. So to me, that says you have the skills to plaster. You just don't know that. So then we learn how to plaster together. And now he has a new skill, and he can charge a lot more for that on additional jobs. And so as long as you're engaged enough, I think, to kind of guide things in the right direction and not let your stuff get ruined in the process, you don't necessarily need the amazing old house guru contractor. You need someone who's capable, willing to learn a new thing, take direction, and then you treat them very nicely.
A gentleman came out to my place to give me a quote on porch. And I was working on the windows at the time, and he was giving me these quotes, and he said, let me give you a tip about those old windows. What you should really use is caulk. You can go now. I said, you will not be touching my porch. You won't be coming that. So that was, good information for me as well, like that even if I do know better, he's not going to take my redirection. If he thinks that he can tell me to use caulk in the windows.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Brad and Daniel and Reggie and Susan and Will for being part of the panel. And also, again, Susan and Will for opening up this gorgeous house for us to have this live audience event. I just really appreciate your time. It's always good. Some of you I've sat down with before. Others are new friends. And I'm grateful to have you here. And to the audience, I really appreciate that all of you came today too. So thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to all of my guests, my audience. And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's episode, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.